Hi, I'm Torte de Lini. So when it comes to laning, it is both one of the most important segments in a match, but also rather simplistic in nature. While the laning stage does dictate your next steps, viability of your hero in the mid and end game, the laning stage is still based on a simple push and pull dynamic between you and the enemy laner. So let's break down everything you need to reasonably understand about the laning stage and ultimately how to succeed in it. By the way, if you like my Deadlock videos or know me from Dota 2, please trick the algorithm by telling me how much you love Ivy in the comment section, as well as liking and subscribing. The only way to beat the YouTube algorithm is to fangirl excessively about a specific character. Whether in a duo or solo lane, the goal of the lane is to earn souls more than your opponent. That's it. If you already knew that but are still having trouble with the lane, then you are not understanding me correctly. The goal of the lane is to earn souls. It's not to win your lane, whatever that means. It's not to kill your opponent. It's not to take enemy guardian. All those things are great to do, but they are all vehicles to what really matters, earning more souls than your opponent. The laning stage is one of the most pivotal parts of the match because it dictates how your and the enemy's mid game will go and in what state you are to be proactive or reactive to your situation. I'll be talking about that later on, but by killing the enemies or taking down their guardian, you are freeing up space for you to gather more souls. By slaying your opponent, you can destroy more troopers and collect more souls without being harassed, and by destroying their guardian, you free up more space in the lane to either take nearby neutral camps or to destroy more troopers, knowing there is no enemy defensive structures for enemies to hide behind and damage you. So those are great additions to achieving our goal, which is earning more souls, but they're not necessary as you are putting yourself at risk and probably dying to try and achieve. Of course, no one is going to let you slay them or take your guardian, so that's where the challenge comes from. How do I successfully threaten my opponent to back off so I can focus on collecting souls? And ultimately that comes down to both who you are up against and what hero you're playing. Different heroes have different styles of laning, both due to their weapon, but also their abilities and what they can reasonably do in the lane. For example, Mo and Krill and Abrams have short range weapons, short range abilities, and they have a lot of sustain with those abilities. This leads you to playing fairly close to the lane, thus you are able to secure souls by meleeing troopers, preventing the enemy from denying your souls. On the flip side, heroes like Lady Geist and Viscous have longer range weapons, are much more fragile, but their abilities have a longer range, so you could typically play from a mid to long range. What's more is that some enemies are better at harassment than others. Heroes like Shiv rely on their abilities like Serrated Knives to wear down opponents with spirit damage only while utilizing their short range weapon to secure souls and physical harassment. So when it comes to laning, understanding the range of your weapon, abilities, and what kind of damage you deal affects how you lane, your placement in the lane, etc. For example, Dynamo wants enemies closer to the trooper line so he can kinetic pulse them to then shoot them down. Bebop wants the trooper line itself closer to his tower so he can hook an enemy hero toward cut and guardian attacks. We know this because their weapons reflect this playstyle. Dynamo's weapons have a slower velocity, so landing hits on an opponent requires being near them or to shorter range, whereas Bebop's weapon is a hit scan weapon, so there's no projectile, thus he can play from further away and thus hook enemies towards him. Regarding itemization in the lane, a simple but incomplete way to view items is broken down into 4 categories: harassment, saving, general damaging, and spirit items, as well as 2 purposes. There's a primary and secondary purpose. By viewing them in these 4 categories and 2 purposes, you can better frame what items you need depending on your hero in view of your objective in the lane and the enemies you're up against. So for example, harassment items are items that essentially are used to damage the enemy. That is its primary purpose, like headshot booster, where every time you hit an enemy hero in the head, they take additional damage. It also gives you additional fire rate, but there's a secondary value that maybe you haven't noticed: bullet shield health. So its secondary purpose is to provide you a bit of better protection against bullets from enemies. High velocity mag is another example of a popular item for heroes like Warden and Dynamo because their bullet velocity is slower than other heroes, so when trying to harass fast moving enemies like Haze, that item helps out tremendously. Now look at its secondary value, bullet shield health as well. So by picking up both headshot booster and high velocity mag, you're building up significant protection against heroes that rely on bullets to deal damage, like Haze and Vindicta. Now let's talk about saving items. Items that are looking to mitigate the damage you receive by either regenerating your health back or increasing your overall health. Items like Restorative Shot heals you based on who you hit, NPCs like troopers or neutrals or heroes, but it also gives you more damage as a secondary value. Extra regen is a no-brainer, regenerating your health while also providing more ammo and health. General damaging items are items that you generally pick up to deal damage, either to secure troopers, requiring less bullets by dealing more damage per shot, or in view of your hero. If I'm playing Abrams, for example, an item like Close Quarters works pretty well alongside my positioning and short range weapon. If I'm playing Infernus, then maybe Rapid Rounds means I can stack up bullets on enemies quickly to get that afterburn effect. Actually, Infernus is a good example of the spirit items category as well. Items like Ammo Scavenger improve his small ammo size and give him additional spirit damage, which he can then activate his Infuser item to enhance his afterburn effect and ultimately burn out the enemy. So that's a real simple example breakdown of item categories. But now you may be asking, what about skipping some of those 500 soul items for larger ones? And yes, sometimes you can skip items, especially if your next item leads you to the next step in your match. For example, if I know I'm going to start transitioning into neutral camps as Infernus, I can start focusing on buying Fleetfoot first. Or how about if I'm playing Abrams and I want to go for some roaming kills in the other lane? Well, I can grab Berserker immediately. Skipping items comes down to both how secure you feel with the items you have and what major 1250 item soul cost you need to succeed in your next immediate goal. When it comes to how to lane exactly, let's first differentiate between solo lane and dual laning. While both lanes will get the same amount of souls depending on your performance on securing them, dual laning is a bit more complicated because you need to account for two enemies, and more importantly, you need to be aware of where your ally is. If you try to make a play of your abilities on an enemy but your ally is nowhere to be seen or is shopping, well, you just achieved a whole lot of nothing. What's more, if your ally dies, then staying in the lane is an invitation for you to get jumped by the enemy. Having one person focus on securing souls while the other punishes the enemy is one style of cooperation, but ultimately it comes down to which hero you are paired with and what is a reasonable objective in the lane. Playing against the Lash and Infernus is a very aggressive lineup versus say Paradox and Haze. But overall, how to lane is fairly straightforward in terms of breakdown. 1. Focus on securing souls, and we talked about this. 2. If there are no trooper souls available or coming up, damage your opponent. 3. If the opponent is pushed back to their tower, focus on denying their souls and harassing them. 4. If your opponent is dead, hiding, or unable to fight back due to low health, chip away at their guardian. You can also return to your side shop for some items for the next trooper wave, or even take a neutral camp nearby including the enemies. And 5. If your opponent is returning to the lane and or guardian is about to destroy your troopers and all the neutral camps have been taken, you can still spend some time destroying boxes and golden relics. Don't forget that golden relics give permanent power ups to your hero, and so regularly destroying them is well worth the time. Now on the flip side, if you have been pushed back behind your tower, focus on destroying the enemy troopers as fast as possible, as that gives space for your opponent to chip away at your tower and even harass you back. You want the tower to not be preoccupied, so the moment your opponent steps out of position or is within the range of your guardian, the guardian will immediately attack them. If you're constantly taking damage and being harassed, you need to think more about how to regenerate that health in order to keep pace with the lane and the damage received. Items like the one we mentioned previously in this video assist in that. Maybe catching the healing trooper as it arrives in your lane is another great idea. Winning your lane is fairly straightforward. If a nearby lane is pushed in by the enemy, you can roam to that lane and gank as 3 allies versus those 2, especially if you're a hero like Abrams or Mo and Krill who have great initiation abilities. If you're a hero that plays for the late game like Infernus, then maybe chilling in your lane and collecting more souls uninterrupted is the way to go. You can even try pushing and taking the lane's walker if no one is responding to your victory lap. Now regarding losing your lane, I think people tend to overreact about how fast you lost your guardian. Losing a tower is not the end of the world, and in fact you can actually still deny souls from your opponent if they did take your tower, and then at least get something out of the whole thing. You need to understand that these towers are actually pretty frail compared to say Dota 2. Losing it means you lose map control and it frees up a lot of options for the enemy player, as we've mentioned in my last section. But it also means that you are no longer needed in that lane if it proves to be too difficult to stay in it without dying over and over again. If you do think you should return to that lane, you might be putting yourself more at risk because now the opponent has received a lot of souls for destroying your guardian, thus have more items and can easily slay you even faster. So what's important to be mindful of is that if you do lose your tower, focus on what your options are and depending how early you lost your lane. If you lost your guardian incredibly early, you might only have boxes and golden relics to consider. Maybe there's a nearby lane you roam over to if the enemy is pushed up against your team's guardian. If the match has made some headway in duration, you can pick up something like monster rounds and just start taking neutral camps wherever you can. Maybe Fleetfoot or Sprint Boots to help rotate between different neutral camps. Your goal now is to keep pace with your opponent and try to farm the items you need to hit your hero's timings. The absolute worst thing you can do is take unnecessary risks by trying to fight the enemy team when you're behind in net worth and unable to really perform. Each attempt will only dig you further. When it's dead, you can just focus on farming what's available on the map and just avoid dying until you get your own core items. I understand that you think you need to defend your guardians, walkers, or save your friends, but if you're honestly behind in net worth, don't have any items, and can't really fight without dying, you're only compounding the problem to an even bigger issue. Resist that peer pressure to save those who make mistakes and stay disciplined on what you need to be doing, not what you think you should do. Okay, some final tips before I go. 1. A lot of times your opponent will try to hide behind some environmental prop like barrels or a public display sign. It's very key here that you reposition yourself accordingly to have line of sight on them to harass and damage them. By letting them hide, you give them comfort to continuing to secure souls and regenerate their health. 2. When the opponent is low on health, don't take an excessive amount of risk like diving their tier 1 guardian without knowing for sure you can kill them. Sometimes the kill threat of you potentially being able to kill them is just as paralyzing to the enemy as killing them and forcing them to respawn. As long as you can suppress your enemy's presence in the lane, you can outpace their souls and ultimately purchase the last items needed to finish them off. Slide and shoot to maximize the amount of damage you deal to the tower without needing to reload. You can do this by just pressing down on your keyboard and the slide hotkey and then move back up to then do it again to give yourself infinite ammo. Lastly, number 4, oftentimes people don't really use their abilities as much as they should to harass their opponents. Even their ultimate ability goes unused despite there being no additional costs to use them except they'll be on cooldown. If you are passive in the lane or just allowing your opponents to freely take souls while you try to deny them, you are not using everything that you have to win your lane. Okay, I didn't think this video would be as long as it was, but there you go. Evidently this video won't cover everything, but hopefully it covers enough. And let me know in the comments what has worked out best for you during the laning stage.